Tomorrow is MLK Day. I do want to start though with a bit of an apology for being so casually attired. But as you heard, there is a Women Celebrating Women event this afternoon down at the museum starting at 2 o'clock, and I'm part of the planning committee for that, and so I'm going to need to leave from church and go immediately down there. So that's why I'm dressed the way I am. So Martin Luther King was born in 1929 to a Baptist minister father and a choir director mother. His path to becoming a Baptist minister seemed practically preordained. King entered college as a mere 15-year-old, and after graduating from Morehouse College at the ripe old age of 19, he entered divinity school. He married Coretta Scott in 1953 when he was 24 years old. As was the norm in that day, even though he and his father were very active in the anti-racism movement, he made the executive decision to limit Coretta's work in the civil rights movement, because of course he was the husband, so that was his prerogative, because he expected her instead to be a housewife and mother. King was hardly perfect. We know about his affairs with women. We know that sometimes he hesitated morally. King initially distanced himself from Bayard Rustin, the brilliant community organizer who was also an out gay man, and that was at the insistence of fellow leaders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Eventually, though, King listened to his own lights and brought Rustin back to plan the historic March on Washington, which probably would not have been the success it was, but for Rustin's involvement. Although he opposed the war in Vietnam, it took King a while before he spoke publicly on this issue, as he feared his opposition to the war cost him support by white allies. What kind of preacher would Martin Luther King Jr. be if he was coming of age as a minister today? Would he even be Baptist? Maybe he would have been a Unitarian. It's not as crazy as you think, because King and his wife attended Unitarian churches for a time. But they sadly came to the conclusion that he would not be able to lead the African American community in anti-racism work from the position of being a Unitarian minister. He felt that he could only do that kind of work within the construct of the fundamentalist Christian community. I would like to imagine that the Unitarian Universalist community has grown to the point that an African American minister could thrive here and could also work within the African American community and be taken seriously. I think everyone has heard the Martin Luther King quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." But very few people realize that that quote is not King's. It actually came from the 19th century Unitarian minister, Theodore Parker. And King never claimed it was his, but we all assume it was. So it came from a Unitarian because he studied deeply our religion. You know, what would our denomination become with a Martin Luther King as one of our leaders? I don't know about you, but I occasionally think of this, what would Martin do? Coretta Scott King believed that King would have supported LGBT rights, citing his contention that justice was indivisible, that if any person is subjected to harassment because of who they are, that no one has justice. She believed that fighting for LGBT rights was helping to build the beloved community that Martin talked of, where all people could live together in a spirit of trust, understanding, harmony, love, and peace. Often, people consider the Reverend William Barber as the king of our times. How many of you have ever heard one of his sermons? He is a brilliant speaker and leader. He's the person who started the Moral Monday movement. He's active in the NAACP, and he moves people in ways that other ministers do not. But I think to compare Barber with King is that misunderstands the basic difference of their theology. If you spend any time listening to Reverend Barber, and he's a disciple of Christ, but he is in alignment with the Holy Ghost preaching of many African American ministers, regardless of their particular denomination. King's theology seems to be more in line with Christian Unitarian tradition. His theology, although fully Christian, has a decidedly intellectual Unitarian bent to it. And when you think back in his sermons, they are a mix, really, of a restrained form of Christianity and Unitarianism. King fought non-violently against racism, violence, and poverty, which is something he learned in part from Bayard Rustin. You know, his views on that and his nonviolent stance wouldn't have changed, but if he were alive today, there would be new issues, large and small, that he would confront. Would Martin Luther King Jr. stand quietly by when a male minister removes a woman from the pulpit and directs her to speak instead from the lectern solely because she's a woman and women shouldn't preach from the pulpit? I believe that the Martin Luther King that I know, that we all know, would have railed against sexism in the world, and especially in African American churches. King would have called out such conduct, noting that your words are not sanctified when you denigrate others, that you can't preach equality when what you really seek is lifting some up at the costs of others. I believe that King would have encouraged his wife to speak out boldly. If he were coming up today, he would have been a feminist because he believed in the Unitarian Universalist principle of the inherent worth and dignity of all people. I believe that King would have been an environmental activist, protesting at Standing Rock, even if he wasn't a Unitarian Universalist, because he would have believed in the interdependent web of all of existence. And what would Martin have done when he saw a local liberal church turning their back on their minister after he came out as gender nonconforming? I would like to think that that might have been a money changers in the temple moment for King. The King that we know, I cannot imagine sitting by silently when that happens. I think King would have been in Arizona putting out water for immigrants traveling, and he would have been getting arrested, and he would have been going to jail, and there would have been more letters from Birmingham. He would have been an activist regardless the cost, because he was that person. For all of his flaws, He understood the interconnection between poverty, lack of education, and racism. He understood how that hurt all people, not just people of color, but it hurt everyone. So he would have understood the interconnectedness of sexism, racism, and homophobia. The trilogy that poisons us all. As we imagine what Martin would have done, we need to imagine what we can do. We can be today's Martin Luther King. We can act in things large and small. We must act when we see inequality. We need to speak, as they say, even when our voice shakes, we must speak out. We must both call out inhumanity and practice acts of social justice, publicly and privately. As Unitarian Universalists, that is our charge. So I am hoping that tomorrow that many of you will come to Mayflower Congregational, and as one of your acts of affirming social justice, come attend the MLK service. This is the first year it is being held at Mayflower, and I think it would be good for us to be there. You know, one of the simple things that our church does every Sunday is to collect change for change. We impact people's lives in this community with our change. I can't think how many people we have helped get gas money, or help with their rent, or help with a utility bill, because Dee thought of just being able to let's do this every week. Let's just put our change together. It's a simple yet brilliant concept that we are changing the lives of individuals, of organizations, by doing that, by having our hope chests, and just by the fact that we have, in the last couple of years, opened our church space up to so many organizations. That has benefited them, but in turn it has benefited us. It has made us better for doing that. It hasn't been without cost. It is expensive to heat this building, to provide electricity for this building, to provide water. But it has been a benefit to the community, and as I said, it betters us as well. We gain from that.